in one of my favorite birding locations, I was just wondering one day that I know all the birds that I can see and hear, but when I looked around me, I couldn't understand the environment I was in. I couldn't understand my surroundings. I saw flowers that I didn't recognize. I saw beetles on the flowers, butterflies I didn't know names for, and I started to think that I'm ignorant.
Hmm.
I know all about birds, but I don't know anything about, for example, what they eat is insects.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Birding Today podcast. This is episode 3 of season 2. I'm glad to have you with us. As you might notice if you're watching on YouTube, I have a little bit of redness on my face, and that's because today I was foolish enough to go birding without sunscreen on. So if you want to see me with a slightly redder face than usual, you can go on YouTube and have a look at that. But my guest today is in a different situation. It's the polar opposite, in fact, because he is an avid birder from Finland. In his late 20s, he was an active member of the board of the local birdlife association for years, even acting as the vice president and president. For a long time, he was also a representative of BirdLife Finland through his local association. In the last 10 years or so, he has also developed a strong interest in entomology, and also in the last 10 years has visited Australia 3 times. So please welcome Harry Nyström on the show. How are you, Harry?
Thanks, mate. I'm really fine. I'm looking forward to this. It's been a long time waiting. We've been planning, and now it's finally here.
It's finally happening, yes. And of course, you're in the middle of winter now, aren't you?
Yes, I am. It's right in the middle of winter. It's 40 centimeters of snow and say minus 15 degrees outside. So it's quite polar, as you said, as the polar opposite.
Yeah. I mean, of course, literally and figuratively, it's just so amazing. And I'm so excited about this particular episode to talk about the differences in birding, in nature, and in so many things. So, but to start off with, I would just like to know how you would respond to this question, which is, what about birding brings you joy? What aspect of birding brings you joy?
That's actually a very good question, because I think it's the core of birding, the thing that brings joy, whoever you are and whatever you find joy in. But for me, it's sort of like a matter of evolution, so to speak. It has evolved during the years, and I think it still will. At first, it was purely identification, because my we can come back to that, but I sort of got my interest in birding via an identification problem, if you will. But nowadays, I think it's a combination of things. I think it's camaraderie, which means like the people and interacting with the people. It's discovery of new locations and new birds, and of course, it's the moments. I think enjoying just very happy, joyful moments during birding. Usually, it kind of combines with a success, so to speak. If you go and try to find certain bird and you finally find it, it's just joy, pure joy. But it can be otherwise too. It can be a complete surprise, something like that. But it's just a different kind of moments. The moments might be, of course, bound to, for example, some people are the birders, so they might get a new bird, so which might bring me joy. So it's a combination of those, I think.
Yes, I really agree with that. It's the combination of lots of different factors. Like you said at the beginning, the identification is a very good answer as well, because identification requires skill, a lot of skill and experience. So as you build that experience more and more, then that becomes a joy in itself as well. Definitely.
Yeah, and it was a challenge for me. My we can go there now if you want to. My start I started birding by sort of coincidence. My brother got a present, or by sort of binoculars for a present. At the time, we usually had these very old say, Russian binoculars in families. In Finland, it was very common to have these big chunky bins, and it was just the image quality was crap and so on. But my brother got these very sleek 8x21, these pocket-sized bins, and I was like really into them. And I was a teenager at the time; he was a bit older, and I thought that would be cool. I want to try those. Those seemed nice, and took them in my pocket and went with a mate of mine for a walk and saw the first bird. Took my bins out, and honest to God, I couldn't identify the bird. I was like, what is that bird? I should be able to identify the bird. Why don't I identify it? The problem was that the books at the time were not very good in quality. There were good ones, but of course, usually in families without birders, you get the sort of common ones, very basic ones. And it was actually, the bird was a yellowhammer, but the book had a drawing of the yellowhammer, not a very good drawing of it. So it took some time to sort of figure out what it was. And all I could see, I saw it from the rear, and I saw the sort of rusty rump.
Yeah.
And I was like, what bird does have that kind of feature? And it took a lot of time, but when I finally got it, it felt so good because I overcame the challenge, and I could identify it. So I went again, and another bird was there, and I had a problem with that too. It was a greenfinch, but it was just because of the drawings in the book were so lousy. I couldn't identify it first, but it just, after a while I could, and I was just hooked. It's just instantaneous. Yeah.
That's what I was going to say. It was instantaneous. I guess you're quite lucky, and it's quite a privilege to have a very specific moment and experience that you remember that led you into the passion of birding and the joy of birding. That's really interesting. How old were you when that happened?
I think I was like 12, I think. Yeah, more or less 12, I think.
Wow, fantastic.
Yeah. And yeah, and the good thing about that was that I didn't get too much at the time, because I think it was like spring, and in Finland the numbers of birds get quite low during the winter seasons, but when the spring advances, the birds come back during migration, and we get a lot more species. So at first I got those wintering birds, and the sort of easy ones, and it's sort of gradually the challenge became harder because new birds were coming in, and it became more difficult to identify those, and it was more to identify from.
Yeah, no, of course, and I understand also what you mean with the seasonal variation, because I lived a long time in the UK, and so
All right.
to a lesser extent that also happens, with the seasons, and for our Australian listeners, I think it would be interesting now to explore the differences between what we have in Australia in terms of birding and what we have in Europe, Northern Europe specifically, Finland and the UK as well maybe, but let's focus on Finland in this episode. So what would you say is the main difference in birding between Finland and Australia?
I think for Finland, the birding is much more seasonal.
Yeah.
It's focused in spring and in autumn, more or less. During summer, things become very quiet. The birds are breeding. They try to hide. They are not that active, not vocalizing that as much. So the spring is quite intensive, because the intense situation of all the nature coming out, or the leaves coming out, all the insects are emerging after winter, all the birds are migrating. It's very much happens in a very short time frame. So that kind of is, I think, the most important and interesting time of birding in Finland. And of course, the other way around, the autumn, when the birds leave, it has sort of like a farewell feeling to it.
Yeah.
Like, we'll meet again next spring, but it was nice meeting you, and will sort of wave goodbye and there they go. But it's fun because usually the birds move and you can see birds that aren't necessarily there all year. So they follow certain migratory routes. For example, when I started birding, I lived in southeastern Finland, which is along one of the main migratory routes for birds that breed in Russia and Siberia. So they migrate from Russia to Europe and Africa via that route and return the same route. So it was interesting to be there, and kind of I went from just observing the birds to observing the migration of birds, and I did that for a while, and that was really nice.
Yeah, all of that is so interesting, and it's true that in Finland the seasons are so much more intense and poignant and noticeable between each season. You know, I mean, in Australia, and of course, especially in the north, it's like there are no seasons at all, you could say, you know, apart from a wet season and a dry season, but, you know, that doesn't really count. You could say it does, but I mean, in terms of the radical changes in bird life across the year, there's nothing that compares with that here. Like, I mean, the number of species that leave in autumn and winter, it's like almost, what percentage of species? Like, would you say about half of the species, or?
I think more, a lot more.
That's incredible.
Yeah, and it was fun when we visited far north Queensland in 2019. I was kind of, I'm a very much a planner. I really like to do my research beforehand, and I really did a very detailed itinerary, and I kind of planned the whole thing through, and I was focused on what birds should we get more if we postpone the trip a bit. And it was funny to see that even though it was kind of springtime and summer was coming, it was like 2 or 3 species.
Yeah.
in Finland, that would be at least 20, 30, could be more. It's just intense.
Yeah, it's just such a different world, and I'm really excited to talk about Australia a bit later too, about your experiences.
Yeah.
But for now, I really want to focus on Finland, because I'm sure a lot of listeners and people watching on YouTube probably don't know much about the birding scene in Finland. Is it a popular hobby? What's it like? What is the birding community like in Finland?
Well, BirdLife Finland has about, actually I don't know the current number, but it's, to my knowledge, it's over 15,000 members, and they are, each member is a part of a local association, and we have 30 local associations. So we have a lot of local areas and local associations to belong to. I actually belong to 3 local associations. One is the current one, where I live in Oulu area, which is a bit more north into Finland. Earlier, I belonged to the southeastern part, which is where I was born and where I started. I still belong there, and I also belong to the Twitchers Association. They have their own. So yeah, that's kind of that. But it's fairly popular.
Mm-hmm.
It's not as popular as in Britain, for example. I think there it's kicked really well in the last couple of decades. But in Finland, it's fairly popular. It's become more popular, I think, because of the digital cameras. It has changed the birding all around the world, I think, from just observing to photographing birds, with all its pros and cons.
No,
but,
yeah.
But
sure.
In Finland, there's a strong history of amateurs doing the science in birding. Each association kind of publishes its own magazine and writes articles regarding migration and banding and stuff like that. And there's I think most of the birding sort of scientific surveys and stuff like that are done by amateurs in Finland.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a very strong history that we want to sort of emphasize and try to keep up.
So because I remember, yeah, it's you mentioned the UK. That's kind of the birding center of the world. You could maybe argue that that, you know, that's kind of the cradle, you could say. And
Yeah.
I remember being in the UK, being much younger, and having the Collins Field Guide of all the birds of Europe. And then, you know, you see these crazy species like the Siberian jay, and I was like, oh, I want to go to see the Siberian jay one day. And oh, what else? All these crazy buntings, Lapland bunting.
Yeah.
There's a very special collection of species in Finland and Scandinavia in general. But I would argue mostly in Finland, especially like in the north, in the tundra. I think it's lovely. I think it's just great. I love it, and I want to visit someday.
Yeah. I hope you come. You can contact me. I'm here for you.
Cool.
Yeah. This is actually a very good area because it kind of things are very close. We here in Oulu, we are by the sea, so we get some shorebirds and some lowland birds, but it's only say 250 kilometers to the Russian border from here. We're in the sort of narrowest part of Finland, so in that part we get more of those tiger birds, so they're fairly easily fairly easily to be able to visit there and see those birds. So it doesn't take that much time to transfer from here to there. And we have an airport even, so it's fairly easy to come here, and from here to sort of move over. And of course you can rent a car and then go through Lapland even to Norway if you want to. That's fairly easy too. So it's quite a good place for a birder to be.
Yes, absolutely, and it is one of my dream destinations, you know, because it's so epic, you know, and there's, you know, they say Finland is the land of 1,000 lakes, and you know, so many swamps, and there's so much potential there, you know, for birding. But it's wow, we could go on talking about that for a long time, but I do want to shift to your perception of how Australia is different to Finland, especially in terms of your trips here. So tell us a little bit about your birding trips to Australia and what was special about those trips for you.
First I came to Australia in 2012, the second time in 2015, and the last time in 2019, just the end of the year. Didn't know anything about COVID, so I was lucky, or we were lucky. But at first I came there for work. Me and my mate were working in a company that did some mining automation safety, and we went for a couple of projects organizing the safety for the mining automation, and those trips were quite intense, long days. The first trip I think was like a 6-day work week with say 14-hour days, so it was
wow.
We went in, or we went underground when it was dark, and we came back to the ground or above the ground level when it was dark. So it was we had to focus on the free time we had, which was not that much, but we still did it. And it was actually a really good trip because it sort of got me hooked into Australia. I managed to contact a couple of Australian birders via Birding Oz, the email group. Do you know that?
Birding Oz. I don't think I've heard of that. No, is it?
Yeah,
a Facebook group.
It still is. It started as an email group, and nowadays it also has a Facebook group. It's a sort of it was the first thing that sort of first point of contact to local birders, and two people were really helpful, and they even took us birding and guided us through their part of the or neck of the woods, and we really enjoyed that. So I kind of got my foot in between the door, and I was I was sucked into Australia. But yeah, and also that was the trip. The first trip was the one that had our first pelagic trip. We went out of Wollongong for pelagic, and that was a really good trip. It was really rough waves, but we saw really good birds because of that, or partly because of that. and it was an experience that I remember fondly. It
Wow.
was more or less a um, what would you say? It's sort of like an unforgettable experience. The first time in your life to see albatross, for example.
Oh, of course, because albatross are not, they don't go to the northern hemisphere as much, do they? Yeah.
Not really. You might get some in from UK, maybe offshore, but not really. An albatross is such a iconic species, whichever species of albatross we're talking about. But for us, for example, wandering albatross, capturing it for banding and being like this up front to an albatross, that was really cool.
Oh, okay. So you did some banding as well on that pelagic.
Yeah, that's the banding, the pelagic that go out of Kayama, Kiyama.
Oh, I see. Yeah. I
Yeah,
see. That's the,
it's
yeah, okay,
managed
yeah.
by the SOSA, which is the Southern Ocean Seabird Scientific Association. I don't know what it is, but they do surveys and banding
Yeah.
while on board of those pelagics.
Oh,
So
okay,
that was
yeah.
really nice. So we've been twice. First in 2012, and then in 2015 we were out of Kiyama. Yeah,
I see.
and
Okay, yeah.
actually, actually, 2015 trip we ended up being on national television.
Oh, tell me about that. I want to know about that.
Yeah, it was funny. We were planning it for a long time, and we were driving to from. We're working in Orange.
Yeah.
No, correction, Parks. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
Parks, New South Wales, and we were driving towards Kiama. We had driven like say almost all the 300 k's or something like that, and we got a message that the trip is cancelled, and we were
Oh,
like
no.
devastated. No, and decided that we had booked everything and planned everything, so we'll just bird there on those areas and try to find what they have and make most of it. And we were birding the second day, and in the middle of the day, I got a message that we are actually doing a sort of another trip tomorrow. So if you can join there, please contact us immediately. So yes, I did, and they said that they are making a short, like a feature for ABC,
Yeah.
and the ABC they wouldn't have gone out, but the ABC was pressuring them so much, so that for the weather that was quite rough, they usually would have stayed in, but they decided to go out because of that, and it became a very good trip actually.
Oh,
So
wow.
I think it can still be seen from somewhere from ABC website, like the blight of the albatross or something like that,
Oh, okay,
and we
yeah.
we can be seen on that feature.
Oh, that's so cool. That's so cool. I'll try and look for it and then I can put a link so people can look at that. That's awesome. Oh, wow. That's
Yeah,
really cool.
and that's one of those moments that really kind of synced in, and one of the best moments I had in Australian birding.
To stay up to date with new episodes of the Birding Today podcast, please follow Birding Today on Facebook and Instagram, as well as subscribing to the YouTube channel. I have a question. Do you do much pelagics from Finland into the Arctic
No,
Ocean? Not at all.
no, no.
Wow. There's not a single
Some
pelagic.
might do from Norway. I'm not sure, but we do some. At least the birders who have been to Norway, to know the most Norway, they do some observing from the shore,
Yeah.
but they don't go out for pelagics. They go out for example, the Hornøya Island, which is uh, close to the Varanger Fjord, which is a northern Norway location, and the Hornøya Island is a place where it's a huge colony of seabirds breeding on a very small island, rocky island, and you can get real up close and personal with some shags and stuff like that.
Oh,
So
fantastic. Yeah.
that's a
Wow.
good one. But no pelagics. I think in Europe it's quite rare to have pelagics, but you do get some out of, I think, from Azores, the islands, and maybe from Spain, from Madeira or something like that.
Yeah, yeah. That surprises me that in Finland, maybe on the Baltic Sea, they would have something, from Helsinki. But
But not the problem is that there is not really seabirds to see, because it's sort of like it's a mixed water basin, and it's not very salty, and we don't get us. It's sort of confined to two bays, large bays, but still two bays. So they're sort of cul-de-sacs, so to speak. So we don't get sort of passerby migration, for example, from seabirds. So it's really rare to see good seabirds. Sometimes we get some when there are westerly winds, or storms. We might get some drifters and things that are thrown inland, as you do too, on certain winds.
yeah, of course, yeah, that's right. And also, I think the fact that there are not many pelagics also comes down to the fact of the seasons, like for example, in the Arctic Ocean, when it's locked in ice, you obviously can't put a boat there, and
Yeah,
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 there's lots of
that's true.
climatic factors as well that come into play for sure. And
Yeah,
that's really interesting. And so that's awesome that you could also experience that on the other side of the world, with lots of different birds and have that experience.
yeah, can't wait for the next time. We have actually started planning for a trip that would be in Victoria and Tasmania, and would probably have at least one or even two pelagics. At least eaglehawk neck would be something that I want to do. That's for sure. But the other one could be from Kayama, could be from, I don't know, Port Douglas. What do you have in Victoria?
And Victoria, there's a couple. Well, mostly in the west part of the state, there's the Port Fairy.
Yeah, Port Fairy. That I
Yeah,
meant that one.
and they
Yeah,
also have. They used to run one in Portland as well, but I'm not sure if they're
yeah,
still doing that one. I haven't seen, but I went on one. I think out of Portland many years ago, and that was really cool. Pelagics are something that are really special, and we've talked about on the show before with other guests too, because it's such a unique
yeah,
birding experience, and
indeed.
it really is great. To make a big shift from pelagics and oceans, I want to talk about something that's really interesting to me, which is your other passion for entomology. So, firstly, tell us a little bit about what entomology is, if someone listening is not familiar, and then tell us how your interest grew from birding to entomology. Because I also have been, in more recent years, I've been paying more attention to the insects and the spiders as well, and things like that, because birds are more or less familiar now for me. Like, of course, in this region in Australia, on the east coast, but the insects and the spiders are like, what species is this? I have absolutely no idea, and I imagine there must be tenfold or 100-fold more species, 1,000-fold. I don't know. So tell us all about that. It's really interesting.
Yeah, it's something that sort of happened. I think it was a part of evolving again. Um, at first, it was about 10 years into my birding, and I was really active, because when I do something, I tend to do it. I tend to overdo it. If it's worth doing, it's worth overdoing. And I was really into birding, and I think I kind of knew all the birds by their visual or vocal uh, markers, so to speak. So if I went birding somewhere, I heard a beep, and I knew immediately what that was. So I didn't have it all, because I know my limits, or the limits of humans usually, but I knew that much, that it was really hard to sort of learn more.
Mm-hmm.
So I in one of my favorite birding locations, I was just wondering one day that I know all the birds that I can see and hear, but when I looked around me, I couldn't understand the environment I was in. I couldn't understand my surroundings. I saw flowers that I didn't recognize. I saw beetles on the flowers, butterflies I didn't know names for, and I started to think that I'm ignorant.
Mm-hmm.
I know all about birds, but I don't know anything about, for example, what they eat is insects. So you first asked what entomology is. That is the study of insects. Usually it's something that it doesn't mean spiders too, but it kind of, you can say arachnology or something like that, but entomology usually encompasses that too in speech. But I'm interested in all things creepy crawlies.
Why? Why is that?
The thing is that when I started to focus on my surroundings, I started to look into that. I had two things. One was that after spring and before autumn, the summer was really slow for birds. So it was of course the only only time of year uh, very good for other hobbies, and I usually had trouble spending time in during the summer because it was uh, quite slow birding wise. So I started to look into the insects, and I learned that that was really fun and really interesting, and I learned a bit of something from, I think, all all aspects of for the environment itself. I learned a bit about the plants and the mosses and the insects, and then I immediately noticed that the insects were the one that really kind of hooked me. Sort of the problem in their identification and the challenge in the identification. So we get back to the same reason that I got into birding. So it was the identification. I got a beetle and I got a photo of it, and I was like, "What is this?" And sent it to a, a guy who knew more about the beetles, and he said that you can't say it from the photo. You gotta flip it over and take a photo of its belly, and sort of that got me hooked. That I need to pay more attention and I need to understand more, and it just grew from that, I think. One additional thing was that I was a student at the time. You were talking about the in our last episode, or the first episode of this year, the young birders and their challenges. One is of course the monetary, or the well, you don't have that much money.
Right.
So I didn't have that much money. I was a student, but I had a pocket camera which had really good features for macro photography. So that was kind of the easy way out. So I approached the entomology from that point of view, and after say 5-6 years, I switched from photography to actually collecting and inspecting them under a microscope and stuff like that. And it's been an ongoing hobby since then. And for me, there's a clear difference between birding and entomology. They both bring me joy, but as birding nowadays brings me more joy, it doesn't really. I can't give back to it because the birds are well known, their migration routes are well known, their ecology is well known. But the insect part is, there are very few entomologists in Finland, and each trip can really have some really important observations. For example, I had just a random trip in my birth city in Lappeenranta in southeastern Finland, and I wanted to see a couple of butterflies that live only there, that I don't have in my area here in Oulu. And I went there and I photographed them and I managed to see them, but I also managed to see a fly that I didn't recognize. I thought it was a cool looking fly and kind of interesting. And I knew the group, but I thought that it was kind of different from that group. And I sent it to the photos to people that knew the group better. And after grinding a few months, I think it became apparent that it was a new species for Finland. And that kind of
Wow.
shows the try to get a new species for Finland in birds or or new species for Australian birds, it's really difficult. But for bugs and insects and butterflies, it's much more easier. So that kind of got me hooked into. So I had a way of, where birding gave me something, I had a way of giving back to nature by doing these observations, recording my identifications and giving identifications to the public too. So I became really interested and really involved in that. So I've been in the local entomology club. I've been the president since I think 2013, and I also belong into the Lepidorop. I don't know how to say that in English, but the butterfly study society of Finland.
Yeah, yeah.
And I also belong to that too. So yeah.
Brilliant, brilliant. That's so much to unpack and analyze with all that. You know, from a birder's perspective. Mm.
Yeah, and you said about something about the species counts.
Yes.
In Finland, we get somewhere around, I think, 480 species of birds have been recorded from Finland. But from insects, it's about 25,000.
Oh, wow.
And the difference is that when you go birding, you can hear birds without even any kind of tools. But in insects, of course you can see some insects and identify them without any tools, but you quite quickly need at least a net or something to capture them and see them closely, maybe a microscope, and that kind of thing. So in birds, it's easier to get an overview of the species of an area by just walking in with your bins.
Yes.
And listening. But from entomology point of view, you need to be more focused on how you collect them, how you review them, how do you observe them. So it's and you need to know the correct people to actually make the identifications or confirm the identifications.
Yeah, that's another difference, you know, because with birds, once you get relatively competent, you can identify the birds yourselves. But what about, how does it work? It's a whole new world for me to listen to this. Like, do you have field guides? Do you have like a online, like for example, eBird? Do you have an equivalent for entomology, or how do you do that?
We nowadays have a sort of equivalent for eBird. It's a national database for insect or any kind of natural observations. So it's something that is really useful and it helps a lot. One thing that has really, I think, one of the biggest changes in this hobby, whether it's birding or entomology, is I think Facebook groups. It's a huge tool for networking in these hobbies related to nature. I would not know half the people without that. It's really easy to become acquainted with people who know better,
yes,
who can ID better and who have more knowledge, and you can try to absorb the information from them. But it's, of course, when the species count is 25,000, even 1,000 could be impossible for one person. So you need to sort of tone it down and try to focus on certain groups.
Yes, and the genus, for example, I know is, you know, you can narrow it down to the genus, and then the species is much harder. Yes.
Yeah. Myself, I'm a sort of like a generalist because I think that I want to give back. That was my main goal. And one of the ways of giving back is answering to people who say, do you know what bug this is? And I can say, yeah, I do. So I know the most common ones quite well, even the uncommon ones quite well. So I can help people and I can spread the good word of being interested in insects and stuff like that. So I try to give back like that too. So that's important to me. But I do have some further knowledge from butterflies, moths, and flies. So that's kind of my thing that I'm being more interested in.
Yes, and here's a question for you: is the entomology different in Finland versus Australia? Is it by and large the same? Do you have the same groups, or?
Well, of course, Australia is quite different because it's been isolated for so long, and there are some really cool things. And of course, you have tropical climate there too, so that kind of is really different from us. We are more or less boreal here in Finland. So of course it's different. There are some groups, some families that are fairly even, but it's the same principles in identification are kind of applicable to both countries. So if you know how to do that in Finland, you know how to do that in Australia, but the availability of information and field guides, that's kind of the different thing. But the thing is that when I visit Australia, I focus on birds because it's all new to me. So it's even that needs some time to kind of you need to invest time to be able to understand what you're seeing and hearing. But the bugs would be too much because of course the species count is even more high than we have here, and I wouldn't be able to do that. It would be too much information. So that's why I said that you need to sort of pick a group. So in Australia, I pick a group called birds.
Wow, that's so amazing. That really is. And I want to touch on something you said before, which is the relationship of the environment with all the elements of the environment, because of course we love birds, but they're just one part of a hugely complex ecosystem wherever you are in the whole world, whether it's in Finland, Australia, or Brazil, or Madagascar. Everywhere there's going to be a relationship, of which birds are part, but there's so much more going on with the plants and the insects, and I think there's something just popped into my head, which I don't know where I heard this, but is it something about the whole mass of insects in the world is heavier or more massive than the whole? Do you see what I mean? There's a quote like that, like
it's the mass of. I think it was the mass of ants in the world is greater than the mass of mammals in the world.
That's mind-blowing. Including humans, because we're mammals.
Yeah.
Wow,
yeah.
That's absolutely mind-blowing.
Yeah, the ant colonies can be really impressively large, and they can be they can cover areas of tens of kilometers and be a single colony still. So they are really interesting and play an important role in the environment. But of course, you understanding the environment, you of course do it even though if you are only birding, you still do it because you need to understand what kind of birds are found only in woodlands or only in the arid areas or the outback, so to speak. You want some grass wrens, go to spinifex country. So you need to understand that. You need to understand what you can find from the rainforests and stuff like that. So you need to sort of at least somewhat be aware of the surroundings, because usually the surroundings have a reason why the bird is there. For example, it feeds on a certain type of insect that is only found there. For example, have you been to far north Queensland?
Yes, I have. Yeah.
Yeah, so buff-breasted paradise kingfisher.
I know about it, but I haven't seen it yet.
Oh dear. Well, it nests in these very low, short termite mounds that can be found from there in certain biotopes. So it kind of is restricted to areas that have those, and that's something that when you find that kind of thing with a hole in it, you know that
the relationship between insects and birds. Yeah, that's so interesting. Yeah. I want to just finish the entomology section just by asking about the field guides. How are the field guides? Are they photographic or the illustrations?
They are both.
Okay.
It depends on the field guide. Usually the ones with of course, nowadays it's more photographic guides because the photography part has been made much more easier, as you know.
Yeah.
So it's kind of, the photography guides are becoming more and more common, but back in the day it was mostly drawings, especially if it was sort of like a generalist guide. But the problem is that if you make a generalist guide, you might have some, say, 800 species, and that's just a scratch. So so you can't, if you want to have a really good guide, you need to sort of tone down the species count to a manageable size because of the limits of books.
I see.
And
Yeah.
for example, in Finland we have this quite good moth and butterfly guide, which has around 1,000 species.
Wow.
And it covers all say macro moths of Finland, not the tiniest micro moths, but the macro ones, and butterflies. And it just barely is manageable in the field. But for example, when you think about the micro moths, that it's like 1,500 species, so it's becoming more and more difficult to put them in a single guide.
Yeah.
And that's
for
difficult. So in birds you can use one guide. In insects you need to have a bookcase full of guides.
Yeah, take a backpack
And
of books with you.
yeah, that's why you usually, when you get more invested, you need to collect first and then come back to the books and do the work on while you're sitting down.
So how does the collection part work? Do you have to bring it home with you, and like how does that process work? I have no idea.
Well, of course, it depends on the country. In Finland, we have a very long history with that too, and amateurs are really respected. They do most of the work here, and the knowledge in amateurs is really high. And the thing is with these is that you can do some work by observation. You can do some surveys, for example, in say butterflies is the easiest one because they are how do you say, diurnal?
Diurnal, yeah.
So you can see them, but most of the moths are active at night or at dusk. So it's kind of difficult to observe them. So usually in Finland, it is, if it's not a protected species, you are able to collect it and inspect it. There's no limitations to that, just because the decision makers are still gladly not wanting to destroy the very good amateur network that we have that does most of the studies and research. So it's, you collect the bugs, whatever you're studying, and you bring them home and you manage them after that. So I have for example, a collection of flies and butterflies and moths that I have collected during the years. Most of them are, because in insects you have also these sort of passive traps that collect all the time. So you get material from there, and you need to, the specimens have been euthanized because it's something that you need to do to be able to study them under the microscope. So you can either throw them away, or you can, for example, spread them in a display. So you kind of always get some new material, and you that's how you usually get into making collections.
Yeah.
So it's a shame sort of to throw away the good species or the good specimens. So you want to put them away and save them for future generations. And also the for example, the moth collections in Finland, they span from, I say, from 19th century or something like that, from the early 19th century. So you have a really long history of specimens, and nowadays you also have then a really long history of DNA samples. So that kind of is important too, that you can't extract DNA from photographs. So
of course,
that's something.
Yeah.
And of course, the study of insects has greatly improved. So you can get, for example, a species that's been previously thought as one species is now during DNA testing considered two species. So it's split, and nowadays you need to go back to the collections to see whether it was the other or the other one. So
yeah.
you can do that from the collections, but you can't do that from the observations, as you know from birding. If you don't have the sort of notes on which subspecies it is, if it's split, then you don't know which species you have got.
That's right. No, I see exactly what you mean. It's
Yeah.
yeah, for sure. Oh wow, this is so interesting. We have to wrap up soon because this is gonna be a long episode, but that's all right. It's so cool. I just so I know I said this before, but just to finish up on the entomology, is it the same thrill you get? Do you have a life list of species that you tick off and you say, yeah, I got that, I got that insect, I got that species? Is it the same sort of thing that you have a life list and you go and look for a particular one? Is similar?
Yeah, kind of. Yeah, it's more for me. It's more regional because I first became interested in the local sense. For example, I've been hosting this national garden moth survey. So whatever moths you get in your garden annually are recorded, and then we sort of compete in a playful manner who gets the most and so on. Of course, it's not fair because in southern Finland you get twice the amount of species that we get here, but it's still good to know locally what you get. And during that competition, for example, it started in 2015 with two mates of mine. Now it's a national event.
Wow.
We've gotten like, I don't know, 20, 30 new species for the province. So it kind of tells the sad story of the climate change too, because the summers are longer, the winters are milder. So the southern species are crawling towards north, and the species that were previously found here have retreated even further north. So we kind of see the change here in sort of mid part of Finland quite well. So
Yeah.
it's been quite interesting to see that. But for life lists, yeah, I do, at least in moths. I think I kind of keep that. It's all my observations are available openly to everyone in a public database, so I can check the number from there all the time. So I have no issues in that. But I'm not like I'm not thinking that I have, say, 359 species of moths and I need to get my 360th. When I got my 300th bird species, I was really excited because I knew that the next one will be the third 100 of the 300th species. But in moths, it's not like that. It's far more easier to get, for example, new species for the area or the province.
Yeah.
So it kind of focuses more on those. So whenever I get a new one or something that I don't recognize immediately, I'm like, is it the new one for the area? Is it the new one for the province? And on many cases, it has been.
Yeah, I see. Yeah, it's kind of, so it's the same sort of joy and thrill that you get with entomology and birding in some cases. That's really interesting. That's yeah.
And I'd like to think myself kind of making history, so to speak, discovering all these new species from this area and kind of doing the good work. And now we know much more about the populations of the area because of this thing. So it kind of, I really enjoy it's another aspect of giving back, and I really enjoy it.
That's really interesting. Thank you for all that. That's really cool. That's, and I think now I'm going to start paying more attention. Even just today, I was doing some birding and I saw some like dragonflies and a specific one that had like a mark on its wing, and others that didn't. And then you start to pay attention to that more, and I think it's fascinating, and I'm sure. And and I'm sure that it has a big future, entomology, you know, in the natural realm. But for now, we have to wrap that up. I have to ask you the obligatory questions of the podcast. What is your favorite bird?
That is a very good question. As many have said, you can't really narrow it down to a single one, at least easily. You always, when you say one, you 5 minutes later you're thinking, oh, I forgot the one, the other one, and so on. One of my favorites is absolutely that one. If you can see that there.
I see. Yeah. Have you seen it?
Yes, that's a yellow-billed kingfisher, and that's drawn by a bird of an artist from Cairns called Martin Cachard, and that's a original drawing by him. And that was something that when we were birding there, I felt so privileged to be there, and I really wanted to. I felt that I got a lot, so I wanted to give back. So I gave some funds for fundraising, or these. For example, Artemis Nature Fund, I made donations for that, and I also bought that one just to help the birders, because when I bought it, it was already the COVID season, and the guides, local bird guides, couldn't get work because there were no travelers. So that was my kind of way of supporting at least one guide in a very small manner, but still doing my part. So
lovely. That's really nice. And for those who are listening on Spotify, just behind Harry, he has a frame of the yellow-billed kingfisher, the really nice little frame there. So lovely. Wow.
Another very favorite bird for me is the palm cockatoo.
Amazing. Yeah.
Again, same area, but I have it actually tattooed on my leg.
Wow, really? Brilliant.
Yeah, it's on my shin. It's a photorealistic work.
Wow.
So
that's epic.
That's
epic.
Yeah.
Well done.
And again, something that we really saw, but just wanted to kind of put it in and enjoy it for the rest of my life. And I think I have a few, but of course from Australia I would like to say southern cassowary, which is like the most perfect sample of a living dinosaur.
Yeah.
So that is more or less so. That's a really nice and impressive species. And in Finland I would say the great grey owl.
Oh, what a dream. I would love to see that. Yeah, great grey owl.
You can even find one photo of me on my Facebook profile with me holding one on my lap. So, that was something that I will never forget.
I can imagine. They're so huge.
Yeah.
That's so great. Oh.
Yeah, I was privileged enough to be able to join a friend of mine banding them, and actually at that time I had a friend from Australia visiting me, so we were both there. So that was quite a trip for him too.
Yeah, it must have been. Oh, so many places, and when this COVID pandemic ends, we're going to be able to kind of do more stuff like that and connect all over the world and hopefully do that. But Harry, it's been such a pleasure to have you on the show. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. It was a real pleasure for me to. I mean, watching, I think, each and every podcast you have made until now, and I hope to see the rest of them. I hope it lasts long, and I see some friendly faces there. I actually saw Phil Peel earlier in season 1. We met back in 2019 in far north Queensland. That was really nice.
Yeah, fantastic.
And he was actually the one who kind of coerced me into this show, and
of course he did.
Said that, yeah, please contact this guy. He knows what he's doing. So yeah, here I am.
Fair enough. Brilliant. Well, thank you for your kind words and encouragement. I definitely hope to keep going and maybe have you on the show again at some point. Who knows? But
no worries.
It's been a pleasure. So thank you, Harry. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. You've been listening to the Birding Today podcast. New episodes are released every Friday, and if you'd like to get in touch, just write an email to birdingtoday@gmail.com. Thanks for listening, and see you next time.